So at the end of the last video, the last thing we did was we took our player, dragged and dropped onto the camera, which makes it a child of that parent. Purpose of that is whatever happens to the parent as far as like rotation and movement automatically gets transferred to the child, so when the camera moves, the child object now moves as well. So problem is that when you let go of a key, it keeps moving, which makes sense because if you look at the code, it says if you move in this direction, give that velocity. If you move in this direction, give that velocity. There isn't anything in here that says if it's not moving, then don't move. Now, if this wasn't velocity, if this was just changing the position by like, half of a square or whatever, or moving it a few pixels. So if you're just changing the absolute position, then it would be okay. But you're actually applying an ongoing force, so you're giving it velocity. So we need to set it to 0. So the principle is we're going to have a statement that says if this is not happening. So you can do that. You can say if something is happening, but you can also say if something is not happening. And the way you do that is you have to prefix this with a exclamation point. Why? Because it's C#. I have no idea why they chose an exclamation point. That's simply the way that it works. It's one of those things where you just accept it and move on because who knows why they chose it. Now, because there's so much typing and I don't want to make an error, I'm just going to copy and paste this from. I already copied it and I'm just going to paste it in, but I'll walk you through what it says. So I'm going to need an else. Oops, I've got two else's. Okay. So it looks complicated, but you're really just looking at these 4 elements combined into one if statement, and it's saying if they are not happening. So let's take a look. So you need an extra parenthesis in the front because the entire thing has to be within parentheses. Okay? And then each part has to have its own set of parentheses. So the exclamation point means is not. So if this is not true, double ampersand. Again, why? Because it's C#. Another exclamation point. This is not true, and this is not true, and this is not true. So again, these are the same 4 variables, but by using the exclamation point, you're saying it's not true. So actually, I'm going to zoom in a little bit because it's and it doesn't want to zoom. There we go. Because it's vital that you get this right, because this was a sticking point for me too when I first started coding. You have to get the amount of parentheses exactly right. Okay, so since you can just pause the video, we'll continue. And now, when I let go of the key, it'll stop moving. And I let go and it stopped. Let go, it stopped. Let go, it stopped. Let go, it stopped. So it's working as intended. And there's one other change. If you notice, these were get key down. So only do this if the key is down. Here I just said get key. So it is slightly different. It's just get key. If you do get key down, it won't move. Or it'll just nudge a tiny bit and then stop. And that should do it for that. So now, that's one of the 2 things that we wanted to do. That was the first one, is to make them move and then stop when you let go of the key. The other thing that I want to do in this video is make them rotate, because right now they always face in the same direction. Now to do that, again, there's a lot of ways you can do it. You could duplicate these public key codes on the player character themselves and have it check to see if on her to see if the keys are being pressed. If so, then rotate her. A lot of redundant coding there. Again, it's really not going to impact performance because it's going to be a very low impact game, very low resource game, but it's really redundant coding. So instead, we're going to have a variable and it's going to be a static variable, and I don't think we've talked about that in this series yet. Static variables are variables that are available to any object in any scene in the game, whereas these other variables, they're only available to whatever object this script is attached to. Whereas this variable, because it reads static, will be available anywhere in the game. So let's call it public static, and it's going to be float, and it's going to be, we'll call it XY facing, as far as what direction they're facing in. And actually, let's start that at 0 since they're facing up by default. I'll save that. So now, on this object, if I click on Add Component, New Script, we'll call this Hero Control, C#, create and add, go to Hero Control. That variable will be available to us here. So let's simply put in a get component, transform, Euler angles, and this is a vector 3. And it will just be, I call it XY, but it's actually, now that I think about it, it's actually the Z coordinate, if I recall correctly. GameMaster.hero, oh, XY facing, okay. So the way that you refer to a static variable is you must refer to the script that it's declared in and then what it is. So what you've done is whenever, sorry, wrong section, let's scroll down. Whenever you move a key, you're going to change the variable, and then that variable will change the direction it's facing here. So we're just going to make that so up is 0. Oops, didn't do that twice. Down is 180. Left. It's either 90 or 190. I always forget. We'll do 90. If it's wrong, we'll come back and fix it. And right is negative 90. So what you're saying is, when you move right, this variable will negative 90. This then says, okay, what angle is that? It's at negative 90. So basically you're transferring information from one script and one object to another. I think that should do it. So I pressed up, I pressed down, pressed left, pressed right. Astounding, I got it right the first time. Unbelievable. So that's about it. So Unity breaks up, or should I say categorizes, parts of the application or the game into what's known as scenes. A scene is probably most easily associated with a level. So a level in an old school side-scrolling game would be a scene. A title menu would be a scene. Anything where you have like a collection of like functionality. Sometimes a skill menu, if it's really, really complicated, might be its own scene. So let's go ahead and save the scene that we're working on. So we'll save scene as, just call it level 1. So if you're going to use this for a dungeon crawl, a very common functionality is to zoom in and out. So even though it's 2D, you can still do that. So let's go to our GM object. We're going to go into Game Master, because right now we have our camera attached to the GM object. So that means we can modify the camera. So what we're going to do is in an update section, I'm just going to paste this in and then I'll explain. So it's basically 2 lines of code. This one is actually pretty straightforward. It's a little bit different than the way we do the other key codes. When you're doing a keyboard, you have to set up a variable and then check for it. Here, you can skip the step of doing a variable and just say outright what you're looking for, a mouse scroll wheel, and you're saying is it greater than 0. That's scrolling up. If you do less than 0, then it would be a scroll down. Now this, first we're addressing what object we want to change. You want to change the overhead cam object, which is this. Now what do we want to do to it? Get component camera. So if you look at the camera, get component camera, get component camera orthographic size. So that's right here. This is an orthographic camera, and there's the size, and change it to 3. So let's take one more of these. We'll say if it's less than 0, then we set the orthographic size back to 5. So let's save that. Scroll wheel up, scroll wheel down. That easy. So even though it's 2D, you can still do that zoom in that you usually see from overhead games, dungeon crawls, that kind of thing.